With so much talk in regards to Spider-Man's future in and out of Marvel Studios films, I figured let's take a look back at every cancelled Spider-Man film that's ever been in development, and see why exactly they were cancelled and how the franchise has found itself all over the place. So of course, most people know that at one point James Cameron was going to make a Spider-Man film. We are jumping slightly before that, to a time where Canon Films was about to make their own Spider-Man. The year was 1985, and this was the first failed attempt to be able to get a Spider-Man film off the ground. And the film found itself coming at a very strange time. Superhero movies were being looked down upon after Superman 3, and this was before Tim Burton's Batman would set the world on fire. What also didn't help was the fact that Canon Films was not aware of what Spider-Man even really was, as they wanted to make this a horror film. And Peter Parker would have been a giant human tarantula, with Toby Hopper, who directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist, hired to direct it. So as they got further along in development, they met with Marvel multiple times, and it turns out that Stan Lee was the one that turned every idea they had down. Multiple rewrites and attempts to get this film off the ground would continue by Canon Films, one including a chapter where Doc Ock was going to be his mentor turned into a foe, with some rumors suggesting actual octopus tentacles growing out of a human, but ultimately the film would go on to be ripped away from Canon after the upcoming bombs that were Masters of the Universe and Superman 4. After that, Spider-Man went through a few people and nobody could figure out what to do, except that there was at a time a little upcoming director called James Cameron. As it turned out, James Cameron had been working on his own ideas for a live-action Spider-Man movie since the early 80s, and he saw the opportunity to, in the early 90s, offer this to Columbia Pictures and Sony. His story would have been somewhat different to what fans are familiar today, and definitely would have been more mature. It would have centered around Peter Parker going through puberty, and organic webbing was introduced into the mix. Despite many rumors out there about a potential Peter Parker played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, Cameron was looking at Leonardo DiCaprio. Schwarzenegger was rumored to play a villain in the film, but that cannot be confirmed. It is said that he would have played Otto Octavius. The film ultimately fell apart for legal reasons. After that, we would actually get 3 Spider-Man films that were hugely successful and influential on all comic book movies in the early 2000s. The franchise would continue to live on with Spider-Man 4 until it didn't. But while the film was in development, Anna Hathaway was lined up to play Felicia Hardy, who would become the Black Cat. Except rumors do suggest that she would have become a character called the Huntress, who was the daughter of John Malkovich, who was cast as the Vulture. The film would have also finally seen more development on Kurt Connors becoming the character of the Lizard. The film had sets made, costumes ready, and they already started shooting a few things in New York before the plug was pulled. There is ultimately quite a few factors, including the lead actor Tobey Maguire refusing to work on weekends and multiple nights during the week. Sam Raimi once again being told to rewrite the story to include multiple elements that were wanted in there by Avi Arad, and the film needing to be delayed multiple times if they were going to add all of this and have a rushed production, led to Sam Raimi and everybody else walking away, and the franchise was instead rebooted with The Amazing Spider-Man. The Amazing Spider-Man would then go on to have 2 films, an original pitched idea that was going to be more darker and tell us a brand new mysterious side of Peter Parker's history, where he was somewhat engineered by his father to become a predestined superhero known as Spider-Man. Huge amounts of reshoots, recuts, and complete removal of elements of this in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, and a disappointing box office for the second film caused the cancellation of the already announced Amazing Spider-Man 2, The Amazing Spider-Man 3, a Sinister Six spin-off, a Venom spin-off that would have spun off from the upcoming third film, and a standalone Aunt May Secret Agent origin. Ever since these cancellations, we have learned more and more details about various different things that were happening with ideas. The resurrection of Gwen Stacy, by the Jackal, the revelation that Peter Parker's father was still alive and somehow working for Oscorp, the Venom spin-off, which would have seen it focused more on the lethal protector idea, and having Venom eventually face Carnage, is something that they would later start to adapt in the standalone Venom films. The Venom film that was in development at the time by Alex Kurtzman would be cancelled along with Sinister Six when everything would go over to Marvel Studios in relation to the main Spider-Man continuity. Very little details exist on what exactly the ideas were, but we do know that something is still in development with the Sinister Six, and many of the ideas that they had planned for the Venom in the Amazing Spider-Man universe would be utilized in the standalone film. Now, if we take a trip all the way back to between the Canon attempt and the James Cameron attempt, there was one small attempt made that we have very little details on, which would have been directly written by Stan Lee and directed by Roger Corman. This would be about 2 decades before he would ultimately get to deliver his failed version of the Fantastic Four. Almost no details exist on this version of the film. Another film that is a little hard to place exactly where it would have fit into the timeline began development sometime after The Amazing Spider-Man 1, and in some way, shape, or form could still exist today. This was codenamed Glass Ceiling. This film would have starred Black Cat along with multiple other female characters that are related to Spider-Man, such as Silk, Spider-Girl, Spider-Woman, Silver Sable, and Madam Web. Since not much has been heard about this film, and eventually we would get details of a cancelled Silver and Black film focusing on Black Cat and Silver Sable, it's safe to say that this film will probably see some sort of release down the road at some point, but ultimately it will not be whatever it originally was. And the final one we will talk about is certainly a strange one. In the timeline, it is placed somewhere before Sam Raimi took over but after James Cameron, and it would have involved David Fincher of all people. Ever since that time, it seems like 1999 is when he was talking to Sony about this potential film. And instead of focusing largely on Spider-Man, the film would have started with Gwen Stacy being as the main star and being killed off by the Green Goblin. In a weird shift from making an actual movie, the opening of the film, roughly the first 10 minutes, would have actually been a music video done in a style of an opera. And this would have interweaved itself in the death of Gwen Stacy, showing you the entire upbringing and the death of Uncle Ben. The film would transition to modern day, and it's less about Peter Parker having doubts and being uncomfortable, and more about a guy who settled into being a freak, and now he is this character called the Spider-Man. So there we are, guys, a little history lesson on everything Spider-Man. So what exactly does the future hold for the web crawler? Still remains to be seen, but I have no doubt over the next couple of years we're going to hear more bizarre stories and pitches from various people in Hollywood. And honestly, I can't wait, because it always seems like we get some interesting ideas that certainly would have been very bizarre in the context of a Spider-Man film.